Hey guys, Nolen with Roofing Webmasters. Jason here.
Howdy.
And we're going to talk about how to name your roofing company. And this is going to be a lot more interesting than what it sounds like.
And it's more complex than you think.
Way more complex. So what are the most important thing when you're talking about a roofing company is to have topical relevance, which means the word roof is in the name. So
Right.
if you've been having trouble with marketing and your company name has exteriors or contracting in it.
Exteriors, contracting, construction.
Yeah. And
design. We've had a couple of roofers who used the word, instead of roofing or construction or anything like that, they used design.
Design's a really bad one.
Which is a complete, that sends the algorithm off on a completely different.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So it could be a different branch of the tree.
It could be roofing and construction.
Yeah.
And we're going to explain all this this is going to be a fascinating little one. So when a user goes to Google, they have something called user intent.
Right. Google's
job is to please the user, or else they're not a good search engine. If the user goes and looks for a roofer and finds nothing besides contractors and exterior remodeling companies or remodelers or design companies, they don't have a good experience.
They're going to go to Bing.
Yeah.
And be disappointed there.
Yeah. So, yeah, well, they will go in and, I had a guy keep the word. In fact, he kept it, but I'm like, well, you didn't debunk me. It was actually a different category, and he used the word, he kept the word mechanical, and then he added the other stuff. And I'm like, well, that's fine, but you added the other words. So the user needs to be clued in. And really, if it gets too far off track, because we've had some of this too, like roofing and, I don't know, I've had some crazy ones like
roofing and gutters is
excavate. No, I'm talking like roofing and excavation or roofing and tree service. Like we've had some weird ones.
Some weird combos.
Yeah. The client
We're already up here. We can reach the trees. We might as well do it.
Yeah, I don't want to have a remodeling company do my roof or a construction company. And I certainly don't want a construction company. And even at this point in time, the user intent's off, the conversion's down, and the user's thinking you're expensive, or they're thinking, all of a sudden they're thinking, their brain goes in a totally different direction. They're like, wait a minute, do I want this guy over here? I want my roof done. I want
my roof done by a roofer.
By a roofer.
It's a specialized service.
It is a specialized service. What sucks about it for the roofer, the reason these guys do this is because they're bidding insurance jobs through Xactimate.
Right.
And the insurance company won't pay them as much if they're a roofer or won't include them on other stuff like siding and other things that are damaged by a storm or hail.
Right.
So they're really just doing this exterior work. However, the roofer's intent is to put on a roof. They really don't want to mess with soffit and fascia and the skylights and the other crud. They want to get in and out. All that stuff takes time. Yeah, I got to go bird dog skylights for somebody.
Yeah.
So, let me recap some of that, and I'm going to give you a way to validate some of this. The concept of user intent directed towards topical relevance, and the topical relevance is the name of the company, right? Having the word roof in it. The user intent.
Do not name your company Topical Relevance Roofing, by the way.
Well,
somebody was thinking it.
Yeah. So the user intent is to look for a roofer. Topical relevance is the roofing. If you don't have the word roof in the name, the user doesn't get what they want. Google and major markets and bigger markets won't tend to have something in at least map ranking without the word roof in it. And so if you'll check this in Dallas or Raleigh, North Carolina, or just bigger markets around the country and type in roofer in city and state abbreviation, or just roofer in Raleigh or whatever, and I hadn't done this recently, you'll almost never find someone in top ranking without the word roof. Now, in smaller sub-markets, you can find somebody without the word roof in it because the algorithm will loosen a little bit because there's less people to choose from.
Yeah, they have less choices to show. And so they'll go to the second tier, as they view it, the second tier.
So second tier, meaning they have a great score with Google on other things. So
right. Meaning less. When I say second tier, I don't mean your company is bad. I don't mean your service is bad. I mean your relevance to search.
yeah, your
is
relevance to
less.
search isn't only the name or it isn't only topical relevance. And so when somebody has a lot of great signals coming in and they're in a smaller market, they can still show up. But when they have a lot of great signals coming in and there's another 1,000 roofers, they're never going to show up because there's enough people with the word roof in their name that have the same exact great signals or more.
Right.
So they'll never beat those guys in those markets. And I won't say never. Every once in a while, the algorithm changes.
It's a lot harder.
It's a lot harder. You'll almost never see it. And if you do, it'll be temporary. The phenomenon of topical relevance related to user intent, and we'll talk about something called LSI or latent semantic indexing, but the phenomenon of this is been around since I can remember. So Google's never really said, hey, we're going to show people in mapping and organic search that aren't relevant to what the user was looking for. They've never favored that, right?
Yeah, they've never favored it, and they've only gotten better
Right.
at figuring it out.
They came out to us and said, we're not going to focus that much on this anymore. So the words being in the name won't matter as much. And they've said it multiple times. It's never happened because the user intends to see the damn name.
Yeah.
So latent semantic indexing is Google's version of a synonym, which is really more related to I forgot what you called it, a topic or a category, an entity. So the entity's genre of keywords, not just a synonym of one word, but a roofer might be into shingles as well as TPO.
Yeah. And what it is if you kind of map it out visually, let's just say roofing is the entity, then connected to that is roofer, and connected to that is shingles, and shingles are also connected to roofer, and it's this sort of
all this stuff,
complex matrix of interconnected terms.
Just imagine like a flow chart or just a chart with a bunch of bubbles coming off the word roof.
Yeah.
And there's just like 100 words all scattered around it, but they're all in the same category.
Right.
So if you don't have the word roof, if you have the word roof in your name, it's like, oh, that's shingle and roof repair and replacement and TPO and PVC. And
it automatically grants you that link, that it grants you to some degree the linkage to all those other entities. And then if you have content about that on your site, it strengthens that linkage.
It makes sense. Yeah. It makes sense to the algorithm, and it makes sense to the user intent. And it strengthens the user's ability to have a good experience on the website.
Right.
Now, if you have the word contractor in your name or exteriors, it's a totally different thing. And a contractor isn't necessarily a roofer.
Yeah. And what you've got there is you've got contractor over here, which does have a line going to roofer over here.
But lightly.
But contractor has its own orbit of stuff before you get to roofer.
Right.
And so you've separated yourself from the entity.
Pretty much screwed up your ability to get as many clicks as you could have.
Right.
So it's really interesting. There's some other stuff and points on here I want to make. I know that I had, but user intent, latent semantic indexing to the entity, which the entity is the bulk of words around it.
Right.
You're not completely, we do need to go over a few other things. You're not dead in the water entirely. I want to talk about a general keyword phrase as a name too, so let me come back to that.
Branding. Yeah, I was actually going to suggest that.
So you're not dead in the water. I want to say this before I forget it. If the name's already been there forever, let's say it's ABC Exteriors, you don't necessarily want to change it. And I'm going to talk about the domain as well, because the domain ideally has the word roof in it.
Right.
But, and we'll talk about that general word phrase for branding, which is wrong, but you don't necessarily want to change this if you've been around for 2, 3, 5 years. And this would depend.
And when he says around, he means on the internet.
On the internet.
Not just your company has existed 40 years, but you've had a website for 50 years.
The URL and the Google account are the two main things. You don't want to just take that and strip them and slap them up something new. And I do want to say this, if there's a presence, and I say if somebody could have a 2-year-old website that's banging because they worked their asses off, somebody could have a 6-year-old website that was trash and not worth anything.
Because they never done anything.
Because they didn't do anything and had one page up, and it was stagnant with no Google account. It's worthless almost.
Right.
But if you have anything of value in the Google business profile or your URL, You don't ever want to change the URLs that have value. You don't want to even do a redirect. The Google business profile, if it's within Google's guidelines, you might say ABC Exteriors and roofing, but you don't want to do this against their rules. And their rules would state that has to be the name of your company. So you'll have to check with your state, get the state name changed legally, get documentation of that, and any licensing and other corresponding things.
Because in some states you can get a DBA and it would be sufficient, but you
in other
look
states,
in your local area.
Other states you might have to contact licensing authority, because if you change it, you could get suspended. And we'll take, I'm not telling you to do any of this. I'm telling you that to be careful if you did do it. You could get suspended. There's a small chance that you could lose the whole thing, but typically you can petition them, say, no, this was legitimate. This is now the name of my company.
Right.
Now.
And they may ask you to show the documents to prove it.
Right.
Sometimes they will. Sometimes they won't. Sometimes they'll just, oh, okay, fine, and they'll unsuspend.
They do it all the time, though. That's why we're telling you.
Yeah, but then we'll get an email saying, oh no, we want to see a bill, or we want to see like the corporate documents. We've had them request photos of exterior hard installed signage, not like a sticker on the door. Like like a big sign on a pole.
So let's go over that real quick too. We got a disclaimer, all this crap. So if you're in your house or in a P.O. box or in a virtual office or a shared space or some other bull crap, not real space that Google deems not real, regardless of what you think.
Right.
If it's not, their rules are basically a standalone USPS that looks like a roofer should be there. Right. So if you don't
it doesn't matter how high your rent is or how nice the building is. Yeah. It matters if it's got a legitimate, official U.S. postal address, not a post office box.
Doesn't matter how much you hate Google or how high your testosterone is or how much you call bullshit on their business practices. If you're out of your, well, by God, I've been out of my house for 7 years and it's been fine. If you go trigger them with this change, you're likely to just boom and lose everything.
Yeah. So we see that a lot where people want to make a change now and it's like they're running the business out of their house and it's verified and everything's fine. I'm like, okay. But if you suggest a change, you're asking them to look at your business profile. Right. And that might trigger them saying, oh no, that's a residence.
Yeah.
They don't care how long you've been there.
If I was going to do this, I'm like, wow, this topical relevance thing is really hurting my ability to show up in ranking as high as I want to be. I would get a legitimate address, legitimate as heck. I would move that and let it season and set. I would change my name legally and do everything by the book. Then I would petition for the change through the Google business profile.
Right.
And I would only do that if I wasn't already making good money. I wouldn't.
Yeah. Don't do it if you don't have to.
If I was making good money in general already and I was pretty strong, I wouldn't change the ingredients of the cake that tasted good.
We have a client that it was his father's business originally, and he got involved in it. His father passed away, and he's taken it over. The domain has his father's first name on it.
Oh, yeah.
And he was like, I want to change it to my name. And I looked, and I said, this domain is 19 years old.
Did he leave? I hope he loved it.
He did. He did. I said, this is the closest thing to a solid gold brick you are ever going to see in your life.
Right.
Do not give up this domain.
Well, you just run. I mean, in business,
I said you
could go out of business.
You will be flushing your business down the toilet if you do that, because you've had, because I looked it up on the web archive.
Yeah.
And they have had a website on that domain
the whole
like that whole time. It was never just a holding page or anything like that. And so I told him, I said, I get that you want to change the name, but at least leave the domain alone. Don't change things you don't have to change. So don't do it for pride reasons of I want my name on it either.
Now I'm going to go over something too on this name stuff that if you talk to some other smart guy in a company, he knows who he is. He might argue this one a little bit, but if you're going to brand the company on a long-term scale and you haven't done this yet, I'm not going to recommend that the name of the company be a common word phrase.
Right.
So we used Raleigh earlier, so Raleigh Exteriors. So let's say the name of the company is Raleigh Roofing and Exteriors. That is not a brand. those are words.
It's a location and a service.
Yeah, it's a location and a service. Raleigh Roofing and Exteriors. And I say, well, no, those words could actually be in a blog post or other things. In fact, those words are in
multiple blog
articles and other things.
There's 1,000 blog posts written in Raleigh that have those exact words.
There probably actually is. And so when you type it in, it might have some direct relevance. And depending on the time, the point in time with Google's algorithm, it might actually optimize well and give you a competitive advantage. But if Google ever decides to call BS on direct relevance of things that aren't truly a brand, then you could lose the whole thing and just get slapped around. So the best thing is to have topical relevance. Don't attempt to keyword stuff the city and service into it, and have a true brand. So let's say that the brand is Nolen's Roofing and Exteriors. Nolen,
especially since you spell your name different than most.
Nolen's Roofing and Exteriors LLC.
Right.
That's fine. That's a brand because it's very unlikely to see Nolen with roofing in that market. So when Google sees it, they're going, oh, that's Nolen's Roofing and Exteriors for sure. Instead of like Raleigh Roofing and Exteriors, is like, I don't know. Wait, is that a brand? And then
is that a well, okay, I'm going to go back to the entity thing.
Yeah.
Because now part of the entity thing is if your brand becomes established as a brand in Google's eyes, if Google recognizes you as a brand, you become your own entity and you become closely associated with the entities that go with your services. Also, here's this entity of roofing, and in your local area, Nolen's Roofing and Exteriors could become closely associated with roofing and Fort Worth.
Yeah, so the argument here, by the way, goes back to that again.
Yeah.
This is what John would argue, and he's right on some of it. There are some entities, some brands that have become the entity on the general word, directly relevant.
It does happen, but
it's so rare that I think it's not a good play if you're in early stages of things. Again, if you're already saying, oh, geez, Nolen, I'm already there. Like I was about to get off the phone with a roofer the other day, and I said, hey, just keep in mind, by the way, I know you're new starting this out, just make sure it's topically relevant and name the roofs in it because that's the user intent, blah, blah, blah. And he's like, oh. And I'm like, oh, I was like, and he told me the name, and it was something like Exteriors or something. I'm like, he said, is this okay? I said, you're the boss. I said, at the end of the visit, but it just happened.
This is advice.
It's just advice.
It's good advice.
Yeah, it's great advice. But I said, if it were me, I'd rip this Band-Aid off now, check on any licensing and legal requirements, make sure you can use the name. I'm not going to advise you on all that stuff. But if it were me, there's no way I would do that right now. I might, because in a couple of years, you're stuck with it because it gets tenured. And it gets some establishment.
The longer you go, the harder it is.
The harder, yeah. You're ripping sutures out a year later, and you've got a gash wound that you have to go to the hospital for 2 years later. 3 years later, you lose the arm.
Wow, this is a disturbing analogy.
Yeah. Well, that's what happens to you. I mean, you're crippled if you did it 5 years into the game.
Yeah.
You cripple yourself. You're done. You may not make it back to where you were.
And the other one we see a lot is people will name city service, like Raleigh Roofer. Or you say yourself, Raleigh Roofing and Exterior.
Raleigh Roofing and Exterior.
And that, it does have keyword relevance, so it seems to have topical relevance, but it's much more difficult to establish that as a brand, which is kind of the whole point.
We just signed up a client.
Yeah, I was avoiding
that has a city name with the word roofing, but I think it has the word co. Yeah. And the word co or company is the only distinguishing characteristics. I don't even think we were able to add LLC to it or anything.
Yeah. And even
we might have been
city service company is a phrase.
It's a phrase. It's not a brand.
I'm looking for a roofing company in city.
It's possible, depending on the city that I'm in. If I'd seen their trucks before, I'm like, okay, I've seen that before. That's a real company. But a lot of times when I'm looking online and I look at stuff, it's like, oh, that doesn't feel like a real company. And then you start getting this icky feeling, and then you're looking over their Google business profile, and you go to and it's like, oh, this doesn't feel right. This just doesn't feel right. And so you'll tend to shy away from it if it's these phrases anyway.
Yeah.
It might temporarily get them in ranking, or they might get caught in an algorithmic change where Google's coming down on people using this to their advantage and trying to take advantage of the system. But I also think it hurts not having a good brand hurts their conversion and other things as well.
Yeah.
Just to show up in ranking is the main thing, but you can hurt yourself otherwise. So I don't know. That kind of explains a lot. There's not a good solution for you if you have these and you're already tenured. The question is what to do with it. Now, from our experience, we have clients. I can think of one out of Pennsylvania right now that doesn't have the word roofing in their name that gets a lot of leads. You know who I'm talking about?
Yeah.
They do fantastically well, but that site's old as hell.
Yeah.
And he does a lot of diversified stuff. So he's getting concrete and all kinds of stuff in there.
Yeah.
He'd mainly like to have roofing, but he gets remodeling, construction, concrete, all kinds of leads.
Yeah.
He'll do porch steps and,
literally anything.
Literally everything.
Anything exterior. He legitimately almost is a contractor at that point.
And the site's so old, it got relevance around and it does well, but it's in a little smaller market.
Yeah.
It's not in a mega city or a megatropolis. And so he does really well. So there's not an exact answer on this for you. If you're like, oh my God, I've had this up for a while. There's no perfect solution because there's fraught with dangers. If you change stuff, usually you can change it, but all the situations that we mentioned about how people search and how Google optimizes people is true. And even on the URL, I didn't go into that very much. If the URL doesn't have the word roof in it, it's a little less likely to show up high and organic underneath the map because it's less topically relevant and doesn't service user intent. If you start thinking about breadcrumbs and people seeing little bits of data, so the URL is a little bit of data that most of the time shows up somewhere in the search result. And if it doesn't clue somebody in as they see it, or even if if they see it in the search bar, it's just going to throw them off a little bit, It's
one of those things that Google will say that keyword relevance or topical relevance in the domain, in the URL, isn't a factor. They have actually come out and said that. But then we look at actual performance, and domains that have roof or roofing in them or roofer perform better.
It's actually not true. Period, not true.
Oh yeah, that is bullshit.
That is
bullshit.
That is false propaganda from Google because that is absolutely not the case. I can tell you after talking with John for way too long on this topic. With multiple people that we know that we search regularly, that being keyword relevant in the URL is not only a factor but a damning factor for someone trying to get up high in the organic ranking.
Yeah,
it's freaking frustrating, man. Yeah. I don't know what else to tell you about it.
I think what it is Google wants to turn that off. Yeah. They want the algorithm to judge the site based what's in the site, but they have legacy parts of the algorithm that still look at that. And what they're trying to do is get everybody else to give it up so that they can turn it off.
I disagree a little bit with it because it goes back to user intent.
Yeah.
They can ignore it or turn it off because a user wants to see it.
No, I'm not disagreeing with you. I say I think they want to.
I agree with that.
They're unable to.
But it would hurt the user experience.
Yeah.
Which would hurt their algorithm.
Which would hurt their advertising.
Which would hurt their money. Yeah. So yeah, I mean they're very dominant at this point, but they're vulnerable if they don't provide a good service. So yeah, I don't. It's all these things have always been such a factor that when someone calls me and doesn't have the word roof in the name, if the site's less than 2 years old and hasn't gone hog wild with marketing, like we have clients every once in a while, they'll have 150 reviews in 2 years. You don't touch that really.
Right.
If they haven't gone hog wild, I'll bring it up. They never like to hear it.
No.
But they like the fact that I'm honest about it. It's because I see it and I'm like, oh. And the reason I say something is because the way we structure our deals, I don't make any money with these clients up front. and they're not on a long-term agreement, and they're on month to month, so if they don't stay, I don't make any money. The chance of it not working has gone up considerably without topical relevance.
Yeah. Or at the very least, success has been pushed back by 3 or even 6 months.
That's a better way to put it.
And they're never going to hang on long enough.
Yeah, they can make it, and I'll say that, I will say this, they would make money. They would be better with us, but it'll take longer and they'll have a little less results than they otherwise would have.
Right.
And maybe a lot less results depending on the market. Depends on what it is.
Yeah.
Anyway, there you go. Go name your roofing company.
Topical relevance plus a brandable element. Like Nolen, because he spells it with an E, is unique, and so that's a great one.
It could be Jason's Roofing.
I mean, it could, unless there's already another one in your area. Jason's a fairly common name.
Right.
But, whatever it is, I was just pointing out that yours would be especially good.
It would be hard. It would be much more likely that the name was available on the state level for legal purposes.
Yeah.
And that Google, when they saw it, wasn't going to mistake it with anyone in the country.
Yeah.
Or at least in the state.
Yeah. And that's the thing. It can't be mistaken for another brand or just the general idea.
Jason, I get it all the time to where it's like, we're going to be Prestige or Alliance and it's like...
All American.
At
one point, we had 4 clients in our portfolio, all named All American something.
I had a guy the other day out of somewhere in Colorado with a roofing company, and the stinking name was exact minus plural. He's
What?
like, yeah, they had S's and he didn't have S's, and they were like 20 miles away, 30 miles away. I mean, they were right there. And I'm like, it's the same name. And he said, well...
I thought you were saying it was literally exact minus plural. And I'm like, what the hell does that mean?
They had S's on it, and he didn't on part of the...
On whatever the name was.
Two of the words were plural on like a 4-word name.
And they had made it singular.
The name was exact. And I'm like, I'm not an attorney, and I'm not going to give you legal advice. Having said that, I know damn well this is like, you could sue for anything anyway. And I've talked to intellectual property attorneys before, unfortunately, and there's no way. I was like, he said, well, the state let me have it. And I'm like, state letting you have it doesn't mean they can't sue your pants off.
Also, if you want to ignore the legal argument,
I was about to get there. Yeah,
the Google might look at it and think you're that same guy and give all of your optimization to the other entity.
They probably will, and penalize it because they think that the other people got a local website with the same name.
Yeah,
and I'm like,
they think the original entity is trying to get 2 spots on the front page, so they ignore it entirely.
I mean, at some point I stopped talking to people if they're not listening to me, but it was all I could say, but besides like, no. I mean, no, you can't do business with us. This is like, I kind of wanted to say, you can never do business with us because this is so off base that you couldn't possibly be a good client.
The kind of the functional basis of your mind is so far off, we can't have this conversation.
Yeah, if I had like some sort of continuing education credit that not like, I'm sorry, I'm the local authority on this. I'm the head of this. I mandate you to go to remedial training on this category. All right, guys, that was a good one. I hope that you enjoyed it. And even if somebody's already, I got it, I'm done. I got roofing. I'm branded. I'm in the URL.
That's still only one thing.
It is one thing, but it's if they understand the brand and how Google's looking at it, them understanding this topic's going to help them run their business better.
True enough.
Yeah, so it's important to know some of this stuff so that you can understand how Google's looking at it. And now that you've done this properly, your job is now that you have the user intent, you have the proper entity, latent semantic indexing, category of keywords, it ties in through everything, is to distribute quality content regularly in this world of stuff so that you get a better SEO grade and you dominate your local market.
Right.
And all those things are for a different podcast, another time. Take it easy.
Easy.
See you.